We're going to hear from Mr. Sam ACHAMPONG, who's the Regional Director of CIPS. That's acronym for Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. All that's fine, but when I asked Sam, tell me something interesting about your presentation that the audience would like to hear, Sam told me that, look, I'm an out-and-out procurement professional. I've been doing this for many years. And I quote Sam, procurement skills are in my blood. Yeah, it's in his blood. He loves procurement. The first thing that struck me was the passion he has when he talks about procurement, and you're going to immediately sense that when he comes on stage and shares his views on procurement with you. So without any further ado, Sam, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. I don't remember saying that, but it's good anyway. He's a good hype man. Good evening, everyone. Oh dear. Okay, we got dinner coming up, so let's wake up a little bit. I'm waiting for dinner as much as you, so good evening, everyone. Oh, there you go. It does work. So thank you very much for inviting me tonight. My name's Sam ACHAMPONG. I'm the Regional Director for the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So some of the things you said are true. I am passionate about procurement. It's what I do. It's all I've ever done, really. So it's a good job I'm passionate about it. So very thrilled to have been invited here to this event this evening here in Qatar. I'm based in Dubai, so I do like to have a hop, skip and a jump across the water to come to Doha once in a while. I've been in procurement for many, many years. Originally back in the UK, but I've been in this region and based in Dubai for the last 8 years. So I do have an understanding of procurement in both regions and in many industries. I've actually worked across many industries. I've worked in the procurement space, in government, telecoms, construction, and a number of areas. But if there is a particular area that I've had particular bits of experience in, it's probably real estate. Having worked for 2 large real estate organizations, one being Land Securities back in the UK, where I worked for many, many years, and the other one being the Keel, which is a real estate organization in Dubai. So my current role is the Regional Director for the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, CIPS, or CIPS, as we like to call ourselves. For those who don't know who CIPS are the global body who represent procurement professionals and the global body who represent the procurement profession. So we look after standards in procurement in terms of qualifications, and we look after standards in procurement in terms of process and practices within organizations. So I was really interested in Zoltan's comments and in terms from someone who practices procurement from the outside. And it's really refreshing to see that there are some really good ideas in trying to implement some funky procurement practices in what everyone does. So the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, the largest professional procurement body in the world. We have about 150,000 members globally. We have offices in 6 countries, one in Dubai, as I mentioned, one in the UK, one in Turkey, one in China, Australia, and Africa, in South Africa as well. So that's where we're based. But we have members in 150 countries, and we hold examinations and qualification workshops in all of those countries. So that's what we do. But that's not all we do. We also hold what we call the global standard for procurement. So we are able to look at an organization's procurement function and determine how it stacks up globally. So we have what we call the CIPS corporate certification. And if you look at, I guess, the nearest organization to here that has CIPS corporate certification is the Qatar Foundation. So we've worked with Qatar Foundation very closely, looked at their procurement function, and we have certified it CIPS Platinum. So we work with corporates as well as individuals. That's one of the things we do. Our qualifications on an individual basis are also qualifications that are mandated by certain governments and non-government organizations across the world. So, for example, there are certain areas of the UK government where if you work in procurement, you have to have the qualification that we call MCIPS, or the professional designation. So certain procurement roles within the UK government, you have to have that. And the same goes for certain other institutions and certain other governments around the world. For example, if you work for the United Nations, the UNDP, again, the United Nations mandate CIPS qualifications for their procurement staff. So that's some of the things we do. We're also the advocates for licensing the procurement profession. And what we mean by that is we're very strong on saying that if you are a procurement professional, if your only role is procurement, you must be qualified in that. So we're big advocates about that, and we have a lot of support around the world. We have a statement from the United Nations that supports that. We have statements from other corporates around the world. For example, Etihad Airways, you'll notice on their website, they support the advocacy of licensing the procurement profession using CIPS qualifications. So that's another thing, one of the things we do. We are also, I guess, finally the only professional procurement organization who has qualifications up to degree level. So our qualifications, our diplomas are equalized on education frameworks so that if you have the professional diploma in procurement that's applied from CIPS, it's equal to a master's degree. That's one of the things we do. So about 100,000 students last year globally took CIPS qualifications, and there's about 1 million people who dip in and out of the CIPS website looking for CIPS knowledge. So that just gives a bit of a background on what we do. And I always like to put that into context as to what CIPS do, because one of the biggest things that I find is that not a lot of people, including myself sometimes, can properly identify what procurement means. And I don't blame them, because there are many, many descriptions for what procurement is. Is it purchasing? Is it logistics? Is it supply chain management? There's many, many words that try and describe what procurement is. In fact, I think there's a lot of people who don't even know that procurement in itself is a profession, which is interesting. I know certainly my own kids, when they asked me, some time ago now, they understand now, but when they asked me what I do, I struggle to say what I do. It's interesting. So what do? You procure. What does that mean? Do you buy stuff? Well, that's not really a job, is it? So it's an interesting profession. It's an interesting definition of procurement, but it's hard to define. And I guess that's one of the definitions we use. It's the act or actions involved in obtaining goods and services for the lowest total cost of ownership. And the key there is in the bottom bit, which is not news to anyone here, because you're all very, very involved in procurement, and you've been procuring all day, to be honest, up to this time, so you know what that means. But the key for procurement professionals is that that is the only common denominator, and that's what differentiates you from simply just buying stuff. It always has to involve the lowest total cost of ownership, which I'll allude to a little bit more as I go through. And of course, at the end, please do ask any questions if anyone has any questions. So procurement as a function and as a profession works in many, many spheres. So in construction, obviously there is an element of procurement in there, and there is a role for procurement professionals all across the space. In retail, for the real estate companies who are involved in retail, who are involved in commercial real estate, small works or build, own and transfer contracts. There's a large scope for procurement professionals to work in there. What you find, a lot in this region, but globally as well, construction, in particular, is one of the least areas where you'll find procurement professionals. Which is a shame, because it's probably one of the most critical procurement areas, but typically you find less procurement professionals in that space, which is an interesting statistic that we found out. In commodities, you find a lot of procurement professionals there. There's a lot of commodities to buy. If you're an organization that buys fuel, oil, or fast-moving consumer goods, those are commodities where you find procurement professionals looking for the lowest total cost of ownership.
I just have a relevant question over here. If you look at that Venn diagram, the blue section, professional services, nowhere do I see negotiation. So my question is, how important are negotiation skills to a procurement professional?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think what I'm doing here is I'm just highlighting the industry sectors as opposed to the skills. So what you have there is professional services, and when I'm talking about procuring professional services, I'm talking about people who procure maybe facilities management services, people who go out there and procure legal services, people who go out there and find consultants. So they will put out a tender, a bid, or an RFP, whatever you want to call it, for those services. So I'm talking about the industry sectors, but of course, negotiation is a very key part of what we all do, let alone procurement professionals. So professional services, going on to professional services, you do find a large glut of procurement professionals in this area. So facilities management services, cleaning services, security services, all those sorts of soft services, you do find a developed skill with procurement professionals in this region, which is good to see. So going on, I think looking at procurement in the real estate industry rather, it's not very different to any other industry really, except for the fact that in the real estate industry, if you're a real estate company, the biggest thing you do is construction. Now, sometimes it doesn't seem that way because real estate companies spend a lot of time on the maintenance side and on the delivery of service, but you've got to remember that to put those assets in there in the first place, it's all about construction, and that's big bucks. So 80 to 90% of the spend in the real estate industry and in many other functions is on construction. So it's interesting to note, and this goes across all industries, that no matter how you look at it, 80% of savings on any tender, bid, RFP, or whatever you want to call it, 80% of those savings happen before you've even put a bid out to market. 80%. And that's very interesting, and the way it pans out is this. It says that the specification that you put together, the suppliers that you want to choose, the criteria that you want to place against those suppliers, they will save you a lot more money than when you actually put a tender out into the market. Because once you've done that, it's out there, and anything else is costing you money. So it's very, very interesting. It's very, very important, I think, to spend more time pre-tender, putting that together, than when the tender's gone out. To a certain extent, negotiation, as important as it is an afterthought. A lot of the methods, and a lot of the work should have been done before things go out to tender and you have your tender returns. Because 80%, as I've said, of your savings are made before that. And as I mentioned before, especially in construction and in real estate, procurement is carried out by a cross-functional team. It's not carried out by one person, it's not carried out by a procurement professional, it's carried out by a number of people, and rightly so. So it's important that that effort is galvanized. And the only reason that it should be galvanized is because that's the only way you'll achieve the lowest total cost of ownership. So, as I just clear up finally, what will I end on? I'll just say that when we talk about leading practice from a procurement perspective, all of these things should be considered. There's a number of things that should be considered. Cost leverage is obvious. Everyone wants to make sure you leverage costs across suppliers, across commodities, and whatever else. But I think one thing that people sometimes forget is you need to leverage costs at an enterprise level, at a company level. And I've worked for a number of organizations who, let's talk about real estate companies here, who are maybe building 10 projects, 10 malls, 10 residential communities. You have to realize that the cost leverage you're doing is not on a per project basis. The cost leverage has to be across your entire portfolio. And I think that's the main thing that goes wrong. Because the number of times I've found someone building a residential community, and it's happened quite a few times, and they specify, 5 or 6 lift service providers. Which may make sense. You don't want to put your eggs in one basket. But just think about the whole cycle, the whole life cycle here. You're going to have to maintain these lifts, and this is just one example. So you need to think of how you're going to maintain these assets before you actually procure it. And that's where we're talking about the lowest total cost of ownership. At an enterprise level, you need to probably partner with someone who's going to deliver, install, and maintain all those lifts across all your developments. That's where you get the maximum value. And that's what I talk about cost leverage, not just on a per project basis, but across your entire enterprise. The integrity of an RFP process or a tender process or a bid is very, very important. And I've seen once you lose the integrity of your bid or your tender process, you will get you'll lose the integrity from the suppliers you want to deal with. They will not believe the integrity of your tender process next time you go to tender. They will not give you the value that you want. So you need someone to be a guardian of that bid process to make sure that it does say exactly what it says. That your tender start date and your cut-off date and the way it's going to be evaluated is in line with your evaluation criteria. A very simple thing, but you'll be surprised at the number of people who don't do that. It really does stagger me sometimes. Supplier relationship management, big word, but it's very, very simple. And all that's saying is that we don't only deal with suppliers when we put a bid out to tender. Partnership is a big word, but really and truly, when we're spending a lot of money with suppliers, we need to have more of a relationship with them. And if anyone was in this region around 2008, 2009, you will know, 2008, 2009, so I'll just justify why I'm saying that, because that was when we had the economic downturn. But you will know that those people who came out of that recession, we'll call it, strongly, were those who had strong partnerships with their suppliers. Those who spoke to their suppliers and said, we're going through an economic downturn, let's get together, let's talk about how we can reduce costs, let's talk about how we can re-specify some of our existing projects, let's talk about how we can re-specify how we're going to go forward. That's an element of supply relationship management that has to be done. And that will help you reduce costs and leverage on a long-term basis. Very, very important. Evaluation of specification and procurement strategy. I'll just say that I can recall looking at, I was asked to look at a tender evaluation for a large construction project once. And one thing that struck me is there was a huge weighting that was put by the people who put these documents together. There was a huge weighting against the contractor's previous projects. So I think there was a weighting of something like 20 or 30%. And the idea was that based on the project that this contractor has done before, we would give them 30% of the weighting. Now, that's an example of where you really need to think about what you're doing when you're putting together evaluation criteria. Because to me, that's obviously just massively overweighted. Massively overweighted. For a supplier to say, I built Burj Khalifa or anything along those lines, yes, they should be credited for that, and it should be weighted within your tender, but not 30%. Because you've got no way of knowing how successful they were in building that building. You've got no idea, you've got no way of knowing what defects there are. You've got no idea of knowing what the energy costs are of that building, how efficient that building was built. So that's just an example of how you really need to engineer what you're doing when you're putting together evaluation criteria. And that's a way in which a procurement professional can help from a third-party point of view and just review what you're proposing in terms of evaluation criteria. Because past projects do need to be rewarded, let's just say, but they're not that important. You don't know enough information about how someone built that project. So that's just an example. And finally, I think, procurement strategy. And I think I mentioned it before about the lowest total cost of ownership is at an enterprise level. As an organization, not on a project-by-project basis, you need to understand, or you need to agree what your procurement strategy is. If we go back to construction, if you're building things, are you appointing main contractors? Or are you buying materials yourself? Are you engaging strategically with lift manufacturers, for example? What are you doing? Are you leveraging costs on fuel? I've worked for organizations who have huge fuel costs globally, diesel costs. Well, if those are your costs, you need to acknowledge that very early and make strategic alliances with the people who provide you with those with those costs. So your procurement strategy is very, very important, and it needs to be prevalent throughout the organization. It can't be on a project-by-project basis, otherwise you're losing leverage. So that's the value, ultimately, that a procurement professional can provide by helping you to make sure that across everything you do, you're always achieving, and not on a project-by-project basis, but in everything you do, you're achieving the lowest total cost of ownership. Thank you very much.